Welcome to Running Stronger. My name is Will France, running coach and a strength coach, and this week I wanted to talk about lifting heavy, when it's appropriate, when it might not be appropriate, for whom it's the most appropriate, and why we have so many conversations about it on the internet, especially for certain populations. I filmed a whole thing about this for YouTube. Should be up there when this drops. Has some demonstrations of me doing deadlifts to deliver the concept. But I also gave this chat to a bi-weekly conversation Zoom meeting thing that I have with the people I coach. Every couple weeks we get together and we do some version of a book club usually. And then also if there's another topic to discuss that. So this is the version of that conversation I had with them. I did that talk with them after recording the video, so I think it's a little more concise. I don't say the same thing as many times, and it's just probably worthwhile to put another version of that out there. So if you want to watch the video or see what this might be, then you can go check that out. You can also just listen to this one, and hopefully you find it helpful. A couple people in the past, couple months have asked me about lifting heavy. This has not been a, single incident. I have this conversation a lot. Partially because it is really in the zeitgeist of menopause conversation about that you need to lift heavy in order to see progress and create bone density. And that's not quite true. Heavy is relative, I think would be my short answer to that. But the big thing we see is you can build muscle mass and bone density with really any amount of weight. They've really only studied things up to 30 reps, but we have seen success on building muscle mass and bone density all the way down from 6 reps to 30. And from what I understand, those are the reps the study covers. So there's no real reason that I would think that you wouldn't expand a little bit beyond that. In the past, and this study was a year ago, right? So this is fairly new, and it did really blow up in the fitness space. A lot of people are aware of this. A lot of people have shifted training mechanisms as a result of this. But it is new, and if you aren't really up on your research and data, or if you're just blessedly off of social media, good for you, then you probably don't know this. And as of 2 years ago, we thought that you needed to lift objectively heavy weights in order, again, heavy for you, and we'll define heavy in a second, in order to build specifically bone density. We've known that you can build muscle mass, but we thought that the weight that you were holding was the thing that was really stimulating the bone density. And when we talk about heavy in this regard, it would be a weight that brings you close to failure in fewer than 5 reps. Now, when we say close to failure, we mean within 2 to 3 to 4 reps maybe of failure. And this is kind of a sliding scale depending on how many you're doing. If you're doing 30 reps, it probably has a little more leeway of through 2 to 4. Or you could take it all the way to failure where you just can't move the weight anymore. If you're doing fewer reps, if you're doing a set of 2, being 4 reps away from failure is probably not what we would consider heavy, right? It's a relative term. I don't know. That said, if I'm lifting weight for 2, that's a 6 rep max, it's often still pretty fucking heavy, right? So I don't know. It's not an exact science, but when we look at building muscle mass and bone density, we have to take things close to failure. Now, when we talk about heavy, first, higher rep tends to be slightly safer for a wide range of reasons, right? If I'm going to do a squat and I'm going to do a 1 rep max squat, that means that I have a lot of weight on me, and I am in a fairly precarious position and I don't have a lot of margin for error. So if I like tilt slightly forward or slightly back, the squat can fail. And then I either have to be able to bail the bar, which I can do. Thankfully, my gym has pretty good safety mechanisms, or I get crushed by the bar, not fun, or I like throw out my back, right? And these are options. These are kind of the options we have. Now, if we're going to do a set of squats for 20 reps that you might be able to do for 22 reps, then there's a much higher margin of error from a safety perspective, right? And this is why, for most people, I tend to prescribe somewhere in the like 6 to 12-ish range. And there are reasons to not do that. There are reasons to go heavier. But for the most part, unless you are interested in lifting heavy fucking weights as a primary thing that you do, or if you are interested in being a bodybuilder, or if there is a very specific reason to do these things, then we're probably going to remain somewhere in this 6 to 12 space. 6 to 12 is a good enough range to where you can get in a pretty good close proximity to failure, but it's also not going to do this thing that we see at lighter weights where, well, it can, but it's less likely to do this thing we see at lighter weights where it sucks so much that you're not really going to finish the set, even though we're not actually that close to failure, right? If I did a set of squats with a fairly light weight that I could do for 30 reps, it's going to suck by like rep 10. And then I have 20 more of them to do, and that blows. I don't really want to do that. But that's what I would have to do in order to create like enough of a stimulus to make progress. So I try to avoid that because one, it's deeply unpleasant, and two, it's unnecessary. And unless you want to be a bodybuilder where we're trying to push this, like, it's called sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, right? It's like the other stuff in your muscle cells. It's not muscle fibers getting bigger, which most people I train don't necessarily want to look like fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger. Then we really don't need to run that amount of reps, which I always find interesting because that's usually the amount of reps that we see in some of these classes where people actively don't want to get bigger. But the thing is, they're not moving heavy enough weights to matter anyway. You just end up with a burn. We also see this on exercises where a muscle is in like a really shortened position. So easiest example is my bicep because it's right here, but leg extensions on like for your quads are a really good example of this because at the top, your hip is hinged. So your quad's shortened as much as it's going to be at the top. And then here, your knee's straight. So this is the shortest your quad is going to be, right? It's not really going to get any shorter than that. Maybe you could lean a couple more degrees further, but for the most part, this is the shortest we're going to get. Pardon me. Same with the bicep, right? This, with me behind me, my bicep attachment is here. And here, this is a very lengthened bicep. This is a very middle range bicep. And then this would be a very shortened range bicep, right? And when we end up in these shortened positions, they feel real bad. And they feel bad, like, well, depends on your opinion. There's a lot of blood flow and a little bit of hypoxia, meaning that we're not really getting good oxygen flow. And the compression means the blood stays in there. So you end up with a very aggressive pump or transient sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. And you end up getting this like very swollen and engorged feeling. And I do not like it. A lot of people really love this feeling. It's a big bodybuilder thing. For me, it's just not a thing I really enjoy. I think it sucks. And you can enjoy it or not. It does not matter. Whatever is your cup of tea in terms of exercise. The thing is though, when you're doing a shortened exercise, let's go back to this leg extension example. If I'm using a weight that's heavy enough to matter, it's going to feel bad on like rep 8. And so the stack that is a double pulley system on the one that I tend to use, and the stack is 300 pounds. and I can move that thing for somewhere between 15 and 20 reps, and it feels like shit on rep 8, right? So if I'm going to use a leg extension to make my quads engage, and the reason I would do this is because it actually is really good for your patellar tendon over your knee, or else I wouldn't bother with this. Then I have to do a lot of it, and more than half the set feels pretty bad, right? So this is where another reason I try to keep it kind of in this middle pocket, because we can get really good results in this middle pocket, but we don't have to deal too much with the pump, and we don't have so much risk as if we're doing something like 3 reps. Now, one of the big benefits, we already talked about higher rep benefits being like the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy idea. It also gives you more practice at a movement, right? Which isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. But if we're looking at low rep heavy weight, one of the benefits that it actually does do is it forces your body to work as an entire unit, right? And this is one of the reasons I will occasionally, especially in person where I can watch them like a hawk, push people to do somewhere in the like 2 to 6 rep range. And if I am going for a heavy, like 1 to 3 rep deadlift, that thing's over 400 pounds. And when I'm pulling that thing off the ground, it's not like I can just pick it up, right? I have to brace my entire core. I have to fire my quads, glutes, hamstrings at the same time as I pull my shoulders back and use almost my entire body to pick up this weight off the ground. And that like cohesive action of an entire bodily movement is a thing that you're not really going to get from lighter weights. And it's a valuable thing. Now, we have to question whether the risk is necessarily worth the reward. If you're not good at deadlifts, doing a 2 rep max deadlift is a bad idea. It is a great way to either hurt yourself or more likely just drop the bar, right? If you're going for a 2 rep max squat, it is a really good way to staple yourself under the bar if you don't know what you're doing and you don't have a good safety mechanism on your squat rack. So unless we're already pretty good at the movement, this is not really a thing that we want to be challenging too much in the heavy domain. This is not always true for like, if it's not a movement with a bunch of risk, it can be a thing we might push, right? Good example, lateral deltoid raise, right? Like this one where you hold the weight and you go here. Really hard to injure yourself unless you have like a really high propensity towards neck issues and you're likely to like bodybuilder it up like this. Lateral raise for 6 reps, pretty good stimulus for the shoulders. It requires a lot of like stability through the core because you have to like kind of counterbalance that big lever arm. And it's the thing that we could start to do in practice. But for the most part, if we're not pretty skilled at a movement, pushing something really heavy doesn't make a ton of sense. And since we know that we're getting those muscle and bone benefits from this middle and upper range, it's just not a thing we need to do. Now, as I said, you do have to take it pretty close to failure. I think I know a lot of people because I watch them in the gym, do not take movements as close to failure as they might need to build muscle and bone, because again, things feel shit earlier, and we just don't necessarily have a lot of confidence in the gym if you haven't spent a lot of time doing things, which fair, totally understood. But if you are taking things within a couple reps of failure, and by the way you learn that is you might take a set to failure. Pick a movement that you're pretty okay with and that you have a good bailout. Like if you're doing a goblet squat, you can take that thing to failure because you're just going to end up sitting down on the floor and it's okay, right? But if we are doing these middle ranges for the most part, we're going to get most of the benefits because the thing that we've seen is it tends to be like a combination of hormonal signaling, calcium channel signaling, and then the muscle actually pulling on the bone is not the extra weight so much on the bone. It is the muscle pulling on the bone that is creating that stimulus to create more bone. So as long as we are pushing weights, not necessarily heavy, but hard and difficult, and you're eating enough and you're sleeping enough to get the recovery mechanisms, then the bone density will happen about as much as it's going to.